Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this masterclass by KTech Center of Excellence for Data Science and AI. I am Sudeep Kumar Das, your host for this session. Uh, as you know, the masterclass series aims at connecting the AI community with industry leaders to learn various topics and navigate through a wide range of critical topics. So this series looks beyond core AI technologies and touches upon aspects of building a business that are relevant to organizations. So in this edition of Masterclass, we have Gaurav Iyer from EXL, who's our guest speaker and who will share his perspectives and experience in helping organizations implementing and integrating the XAI practices or explainable AI practices. This is an opportunity to learn about the genesis of XAI and how it is now becoming a strategic imperative for organizations globally. Before I hand it over to Gaurav, a quick introduction about him. Gaurav Iyer heads advanced digital and AI solutions at EXL, and he has spent over 16 years, helping Fortune 500 companies and startups leverage data, digital operations, and AI to transform their business models and customer experiences. EXL has given him the opportunity to work across financial services, insurance, healthcare, energy, and industrial goods to transform marketing, risk, servicing, and data management and collections using practical, data-driven, and technology-enabled solutions. In his current role, he is passionate about demystifying the complexities around AI and digital solutions and to help companies start realizing real tangible benefits. Outside of work, Gaurav is a sports buff and loves thinking about reducing friction in human relationships and is a devoted family man. So before I hand it over to Gaurav, quick ground rules. As you all know, since this is a webinar, if you have any questions for Gaurav, on this topic, you can always key it in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. And Gaurav has obliged to probably take a few of them well within the time. And if there are any which get missed, probably we'll have Gaurav answer it later over through an email. All right, so let's get started. Gaurav, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sudeep. First of all, before I present, I just want to appreciate, all of you taking the time to come and listen to me. I promise to keep it as interesting and as relevant to the industry use cases that we have seen and practical applications. And I'll be happy to take your questions. We can also discuss anything, any ideas, any suggestions offline. I'm always available. So with that, let me just start sharing my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, Gaurav, I can see your screen. And not the first slide though.
Okay. It is visible. Can you see it?
Yes, Gaurav, you would have to change the display settings once again. Duplicate screen.
Yeah.
Can you try moving a slide?
Can you all see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'll just start by just talking about what you can expect today, right? So I'll speak about what is explainable AI and know why it is important. I'll talk about some of the insights I have from our experience in deploying AI across industries, and then I'll leave all of you with a few conclusions which I have and a couple of thoughts to ponder over. What I'll not touch upon is obviously the tools, software, methodology, which I will leave to much more capable folks than myself. And there's obviously a lot of literature around explainable AI, which all of you can tap into. So with that, let's just start, right? So I think there's a general notion that explainable AI is like, it's for governments, policymakers, large businesses to worry about. And really, someone who's deploying an AI use case, one doesn't have to worry about it. It's something that can happen later, right? And I think that's a bit of a myth, which I do want to dispel, right? I think, first of all, the credibility of what your AI delivers or the outcome is very dependent, right, on the explainability and how easily you can actually, deliver outcomes that even if one of them goes wrong, if there's one prediction, one outcome which goes wrong, your credibility in the market completely goes off, right? And there are a couple of examples on the right? So there was a very famous this thing of, Google actually classifying an image of a black person as a gorilla, right? And that had such a severe backlash that the entire image classification industry took a backseat, right? And this is real, right? Because we do work for retailers where we are looking at, using AI to help, customers search for dresses, right? And I think when we think about predictions along those lines, if those predictions are biased, if they are biased by race, by gender, and you have customers complaining about it, the AI loses credibility and most likely will get shelved, right? So I think that's a big problem, which is why we need to be able to clearly understand what's the bias and explain it. The second thing is client adoption. There's still significant skepticism, right? And there are a lot of our clients who do one pilot or POC on AI, and then they say, look, we don't understand it. The operations team don't understand why this recommendation has come, why we extracted this kind of work, why we automated this decision. And then after that, it just shuts shop, right? They say, okay, we look at, other ways to automate and to, drive transformation. AI is probably 3-4 years down the line, right? So client adoption is a huge issue if you're not able to explain it. The third is, I think, for certain industries, right, specifically around banks, the regulatory requirements are such that they don't have a choice. They have to embrace explainable AI. And if they have to embrace it, I think, practitioners of AI in banks and, people providing services to banks, need to understand what is it that, they need to supply to regulators. What is the kind of audit? What is the kind of stress testing? What is the kind of monitoring that is required, right? And that has to be built into any AI which you build, right? And the European Commission and the US regulators are probably ahead of the game. But if you think about India, right, it's not very far off where we'll have specific rules around, ethical, responsible AI coming up. And then the last thing is, very, self-obvious, right? It's performance. A biased AI model just doesn't perform well. It will not give you the lift, right? Think of using AI for, offering credit or loans, right? If it is biased, if it is looking at only, high, credit risk scores, right? If it's going by your past history where you only offer credit to a very specific segment, then you're really not going to be able to expand your, net and get more customers into the pool, right? So it's important that AI doesn't, let's say, AI doesn't introduce, allow for the same thing to perpetuate without allowing you to diversify and actually achieve business outcomes, right? And I have a very interesting point on the right? So while this is all about, what can go wrong, AI can do something fantastically well as well, right? So if you see the bottom right image, right? The user can input today a text saying a rabbit detective sitting on a park bench reading a newspaper, and you have DAL 2 model which can actually generate the image. So when done right, AI has huge power. So my point of giving all of these 4 issues is not to say, look, there's a big problem. It's just to say with a little bit of care, right, we can really use AI and deliver large outcomes. So then, I think the next question that comes to mind is, okay, explainable AI is important, it's something we all should look at, but what should we do about it? It just sounds an oxymoron. So how can AI be explainable, right? I mean, isn't that the point of AI itself, right? And it probably is very complex, requires a lot of cost, effort, right? And is that something that I need to invest in? So my view, right? If you think about the AI development and deployment process, the first two areas, right, are around data preparation and just the AI model build, right? And here is where explainability is not the important thing, but the fairness and bias is, right? And I think this can be easily handled by doing a few things, right? Which companies like EXL, we have actually invested in, right? One is, before you start building out any AI model, do a proper data assessment of what is it that you want the AI to deliver, what is the outcome you want to deliver, what is the kind of data that is getting used, is there a way to remove personal, health, financial data and still build out what you want? Is there security around how you keep and use the data? And lastly, how do you ensure that there's a good, strong audit trail, right, of what the AI predicts or generate, right? And I think a simple questionnaire, which if filled up, will allow you at the beginning to understand what are the potential risks and what are then the mitigation, actions which you have to take, right? So I think fairness and bias, and I'll not spend time on it here, but actually is upstream to explainability. And if that is done well, I think explainability will, take its course and be much easier for us to handle, right? So I think that is an important aspect. Obviously, once the model is built, it's about explaining it, it's about interpreting it, and ensuring that the end customers and your users actually can also, understand what you have done. And of course, that's what we will focus on going forward, right? But the goal I just want to say is explainability sits within a broader paradigm of responsible and trustworthy AI. And so that's where I think, fairness plus explainability plus interpretability is what drives, responsible and trustworthy AI, right? So we'll go on to now, what is explainable AI and how we can talk about it. So I just crafted this in the form of, 6 insights from our own experience at EXL, right? So first, on the people side, right? When you think about explaining AI, I think it's very important that we put our data scientists in front of the users of AI, or the end or even the people who deal with the end customers, get their feedback and complain, right? And one of the good examples we've seen is we actually built out an AI NLP model to help underwriters in the insurance business, right? Actually evaluate the risk of new business in a much more effective and data-driven manner. And when we deployed our AI, right, initially we were sensing that a lot of the underwriters were unsure about, okay, why is the AI actually putting up this as an important parameter, a feature, right? Why is it recommending or suggesting or extracting what it is, right? And so what we did was, we actually sent a team of our data scientists and people who built the AI to actually sit next to the underwriter, right? So that when the extracted or when the suggested output came on their screen and they had questions, they actually could interact with the person who built the model. And this basically goes back to a simple theory, right? People buy from people they trust, right? And this is the same as with AI. So once the user of what the AI delivers talks to the people who have built it, I think there's a much stronger sense of trust and adoption that can get built, right? So I think that's point 1. Point 2 on the people side is, look, AI can predict, AI can extract, AI can suggest, AI can have a conversation, but there is an element in all of these processes where the AI should have the option, or the process design should have the option of handing it over to a human to actually have that last mile, human empathy, connection, or just the closure of what the end customer wants, right? And in this, we've seen human in the loop being a very important part of any design. Today, when we deploy AI, we always have a team of people who understand what the AI is going to give as an output, and then who can explain that to the user, or who can take feedback from the user and send it back to the people who are actually building the AI. And we call it AI hypercare. So typically when AI goes into production, you have application maintenance, you have L1, L2 service. We also have a 24/7 or a 16/7 AI hypercare team, right? So if there is a question on or a complaint from the end users, we have someone who immediately addresses it, because the 30 days post AI deployment are crucial, right? You have hypercare there, you will get adoption. You don't, you'll probably struggle. The second important thing about the human in the loop is they really help, give feedback about the AI, right? And so this is where constant training, offline plus online. So I mean, there's a lot of clients and literature around the AI can learn on its own, right? It's completely online. It's a self-learning. And I think while that's all great narrative and we are getting there, the fact of the matter is that retraining is important. And I'll give you an example, right? So we did a piece of work for, again, an insurance company to generate a certificate of insurance. The first pass of the AI, when it went into production, delivered only 67% accuracy in terms of the fields that it extracted, right? It was an NLP solution. Now, that's not bad, right? Because that still allowed the end operational agent who was spending 40 minutes on generating the certificate to cut it down to 25 minutes. But we didn't stop there, right? We actually took feedback from them on what is it that the AI was either classifying, extracting in an incorrect manner. And we actually changed our model, right? So we actually had a model release every 30 days, right? And so today, after 6 months of deployment, that accuracy is at an 85% level, right? And there's a 35-minute, automation which we have delivered, right? So I think that's one. That's the second part. So that's about people and what I've seen as insights. On the process side, right? I think the first and the most important thing is we need to document, right? I've seen a significant, I would not say barrier, but there's a hesitation or a resistance for a lot of people building AI models, deploying it to document, right? And I think that's really something that is holding us back as an industry, right? So whether it is just doing the design and documenting it, whether it is documenting and having great consistency around coding, why you're coding, around the parameters, the variables, around the treatment, and it is the documenting of your testing and your QA. All of that is just something that we need to do, right, in a much better fashion. And I'll just take an analogy of AI we built, for example, around helping companies go through resumes and CV and understand who they would like to hire, right? And I think it's very important. And I think there's a company called Pi Metrics, who I really I think have done a fantastic job, because they've really articulated what are 9 key behavioral aspects that they look for, and they actually give this for an end customer to or a job seeker to look at, right? So it's almost like seeing what is the nutrients that actually go into our food. We actually say, look, these are the 9 behavioral parameters that I have evaluated. And by the way, these are the scores that you have got. And hence, you've either got hired or not hired or put on the wait list, right? So just the entire transparency that comes from documenting is what is key. The second important thing about the process is, I think there are different stakeholders who need different kinds of, explainability, right? If you think about, a chief data officer or an analytics team, right? They're really looking at, things around, what are your features, which features are, which parameters are predictive. Are they, which parameters are predictive, not only in the global sense on the entire data, but for each use case, what is driving the prediction, right? So that's what they want to look at. And for that, you have, today methodologies like Line, like SHAP, right? And there's a lot of literature around it, which all of you can read, right? Where you can actually go and actually build out even dashboards. And, companies like Microsoft, Amazon are actually building out. So, I think the Interpret ML, which is a Microsoft product, actually gives a really, very easy to use dashboard where a lot of these values around the Lime and the SHAP assessments can actually be given, right? So the data science person likes that, right? But if you give this to a COO, right, they don't really care, right? They actually don't mind your AI being a black box. What they want to understand is that, look, all of this is great, but what does it mean to the, cost of serve? What does it mean to, so for example, in claims, what does it mean for, the entire claims lifecycle? Are you really reducing the time for a claim to get closed by, 40, 50%, right? So I think the entire, the CEO point is, how does the AI actually drive better process outcomes for me, right? And so that's what you have to solve. So, one good example which I had, right, is that we actually built an AI around collections, right? And using AI to actually, automate the entire collections. If you as a customer need payment assistance, then the AI can actually give you offers, right? If you as, someone who's not paid, need the bill again, we actually send it. So all of this is automated, and there's a reinforcement learning behind it so that we can adjust the tone, the frequency, the content, and the channel of how we actually collect, right? So we deployed this. But the MI that the operations team, the collections operations team wanted, right? So they said, look, Gaurav, this is all great, right? I really don't care what the reinforcement learning is doing. What I really want to understand is, right, across my various channels, which is SMS, WhatsApp, email, what is the adoption, right? Who's opening, who's clicking, right? Are the cure rates, are the payment rates changing, right? We actually put in a two-way SMS, right? So they asked us, look, can you tell me how many people are engaging with your two-way SMS? Are they giving information around, what is their hardship, right? What kind of payment assistance they need, right? So I think just thinking about what the CEO wants, right? They want to understand what the AI is, driving from a process and an operational standpoint. So that's the dashboard we built for them, right? We said, look, we'll talk to you about open rates. We'll talk to you about click rates. We'll talk to you about complaints. We'll talk to you about what kind of payment assistance that is needed, right? Because those are the things that are, important. So just the point I want to make is explainability means different things to different people. And I think we need to ensure as an industry and a practice that we adhere to that, right? So I think that's the point that I want to make on that. Now just going on to the tech part, right? So the tech part is interesting, right? I think we as industry and, as practitioners doing AI, we have a bias to say, okay, we've built a fantastic model. It predicts really well, look at precision, recall, it's fantastic, right? And you use it, right? But that doesn't do, that actually doesn't deliver business outcomes. And I'll give you an example again from our experience, right? So for a healthcare company, right, we were looking at predicting mortality, right? So we had, what we call as their physician statements of customers. These physician statements had histories around, around our customers, health history, prescriptions, tests, diseases, medication, all of that, right? Hundreds of pages. And we actually went through these reams of data to figure out what are the chances of a very significant impairment actually occurring, right? And we built a great model and we got a good, strong mortality prediction score. But we never, progressed, and the client never adopted, right? And so our reflection to that was, look, unless the mortality score, right, gets into a workflow, which could be saying, okay, for example, use the mortality score in giving life insurance, use the mortality score in actually offering some kind of, health assistance, right? Use the mortality score in actually doing a medical or a, health intervention. Unless these things happen, right? The fact that we've actually built a great, feature set, and the fact that we have a very strong, accurate mortality prediction score is actually very useless, right? So I think that's the important point there. And the last, which I've kept for last, but it still is the biggest impediment to AI and explainability, and that remains the data, right? So AI is as good as the amount of data it gets trained on. That's something all of you know. But getting a lot of data is a struggle, right? So, and I think this is where a lot of people go wrong in not investing in the upstream labeling and data preparation, right? So I think the entire industry around data labeling, data annotation is supremely important for AI and its explainability, right? Explainability gets easier if we have good, strong, well-labeled data and bias removed data on which the AI is built, right? So I think that's the big thing which I've had an insight, and it's very one anecdote which I want to share is that during the COVID time, right, there were a lot of modeling done, and I think one of the issues was in terms of just how badly people use data is there was looking at chest scans. They actually wanted to figure what could be a COVID and a non-COVID case, but they actually used a lot of chest scan data from children, right? And obviously, that was not the correct representative sample. And hence what the AI was actually identifying from the scans was not whether, you had COVID or not. It was actually identifying was whether you were a child or not, right? And so it completely defeats the purpose. And, a good design and data, time spent on data and design would have avoided that. From a real life use case, right? This, is something that we've tried to look at. There's a lot of research around thin data, which is you have limited data, right? But you don't need too much more data. What you need to ensure is even within that limited set, you ensure what are the truly predictive signals, and you basically learn how to avoid or take care or eliminate the noise, right? And so when you go even into post-training into real life, the model will perform well because the model understands what are the truly predictive signals, right? And what is completely background noise and can be eliminated. So I think there's a lot of literature there, but I think that's the big next thing in terms of thin data and AI models built on that. So these are obviously the insights I had, but what does this mean in terms of what we all can do, right? So what are learnings or conclusions in my mind, right? So I think number 1 and 2, right, are just around focus and goals, right? I think as I said, it's as important to focus on the responsible nature versus explaining, right? And I think a good example is just, a black box in an airplane. Yeah, when you have an air crash, the black box can be opened. You will have enough and more data about what happened, why it happened, right? And there is a lot of, you can explain what happened. However, that's not the goal, right? You would have wanted to ensure that you can actually avoid the crash, right? So I think it's as important as I talked about earlier to look at bias, data, and the entire data preparation side, because that can mean that explaining becomes much easier, right? So I think that's the first point. The second is, okay, so you can say, Gaurav, bias and fairness is great, but what does fairness mean, right? And so this is something very specific to you and your business or to your client's goal, right? And this needs to be, addressed and, thought through by you. And I'll give you an example, right? We've been working with banks around, offering loans and credit, right? And as I said, right, typically a lot of credit loans have always gone to people with great credit risk score, right? So a FICO score or a credit risk score has always been the greatest predictor of a bank or a financial institution, giving a loan. Now, the question really is, right, there's an entire, set or a segment of people who've never got access to credit. Now, do you as a bank want to go to that segment? And if you do want to go to that segment, then what you have as your current set of AI and models probably don't work, right? So you probably need to say, okay, look, I'll have AI for different segments. right? I will have AI, which is standard AI for the market I've always been looking at. I'll have AI for a segment which is zero, no credit. I'll have a segment looking at something else which I want to tap into and a market which I want to get into, right? So I think it's about figuring out what you want to do first, and then the AI and the AI build can follow. And then there is obviously the nuclear point, right? Which is, do you need AI for everything, right? There's been a lot of work around using AI on facial recognition, right? And so there's been, at least in the US, a lot of talk around using facial recognition from images around to drive surveillance. And they're saying that, look, when it comes to that, there are biases around race, and certain communities that may not mean or may not lend this to be a very good idea, right? So they actually, in certain communities, shelved this idea. However, on the same side, using facial recognition, right, to do, let's say, from a commerce side, right, to, again, as I said, to look at retail, to look at clothing, to look at accessories, it might be something you want to do. But again, there will be bias in terms of the AI and what it is trained on, right? Because there is a certain kind of, groups of people, they use, they wear a certain set of clothes, or the, if you think about the AI training, it will be trained on certain groups, buying certain products, having a certain set of clothes, dressing up in a certain way, right? And AI will propagate that and will actually only offer that, right? So do you really want that to happen, or do you really want new segments to also get those recommendations when it comes to retail, right, using AI? So I think those are some questions that we need to answer as a business, and then obviously you can move forward. 3 and 4 are fundamentally around, again, as I said, right, data and how we can solve for it. I already talked about the fact that thin data is something that there's a lot of investment research going on. Labeling upstream is supremely important, and I think the other big discipline which is coming on is just the entire ML ops side, right? So just looking at what is the data getting used for the first development of the model, just keeping the validated data, comparing validated data to predicted data, sending the data back for training and retraining, looking at model monitoring. I think this is a extremely important discipline. If set up right, actually can drive a lot of the explainability and adoption of AI, right? The fourth point is, again, just building on the data thing, right? AI, and this is a little more around the NLP side. So AI can predict, AI can extract, but there is a lot of third-party data or even data stored within enterprises which can be used to validate what the AI does. So one is human validation, which I talked about. The other is just having rules to validate and check what the AI is predicting or extracting, right? And I think these are important elements to build into our entire AI system, right? So, and I'll give you one example, right? So we were working on bank statements and financial statements, right? And to look at extracting data from there. And what we realized, and this we were doing in a market which was smaller, was, and we're trying to figure out how this data can be used to, build affordability, fraud, credit, cross-sell scores, right? So we were looking at how bank statement, financial statement data can be used to build those scores. And as we were looking about it, we said, look, the AI is not able to understand a lot of the names around, where people are spending, right? What outlets, what merchants, what retail. And, it will be difficult, for example, in a country like India, to feed the AI the names of all small businesses that are actually offering, any kind of product and service, right? It's not going to be possible. So we said, look, but there are sources like an Experian or DNB where you have data about business names, about business addresses, about what particular institutions sell as a product or service. So if you link that to what the AI extracts, we'll actually get a good, much stronger prediction, and we'll get much stronger confidence that what the AI is doing is good, right? So just thinking about linking to third-party new data sources is just a way of making AI just better, and then it's also much more easier to explain. And then the last thing is to bring it all together. I just think we should think about building an AI excellence function, right? And this is akin to what 20 years back operations team did. They built process excellence, right? So what did process excellence do? They, they monitored the input, they monitored the output, they did a regular audit. Based on the audit, they found learnings. Based on learnings, they did training, right? So this is what they do. This is exactly what an AI excellence function can do as well, right? They can audit. And by the way, an important point to note is this team should be the AI conscience keeper, and they should not be the people who model, right? As with all things, the people who build are not the best people to check, right? So I think we need to keep these two separate. And I think this function, if built properly, right, can drive that entire thing of, ensuring that the data coming in is right, ensuring that we are removing bias, ensuring that whatever we build, we document, we clearly understand, and then obviously once we put it in production, we learn, right? So I think this function is something that we actually built at EXL, and it's delivered significant amount of value. And I'm almost at the end of my time, but I just want to end by saying that look, AI is not magic, but AI can be magical when it is built and deployed by a cross-functional team of people who understand the business, people who understand AI and data science, and people who understand the engineering part, right? And I think this, while it seems like an obvious kind of insight, is actually not what we see happening, right? We see AI too often, right, put into the hands of only a data science team who are left alone to deploy, to prove its value, and to deliver results, right? And we think, and at least I think, that's a completely wrong way to go about it. Unless we have a typical team, when, for example, at EXL we deploy, right? We have an operational expert. We obviously have the AI data scientist. We have an ML ops or an AI excellence person. We will have a software or a system architect, because ultimately the AI is not only a model and an output, it's actually a system, right? So we need a system architect. And then, lastly, we have people who actually can, validate the output, look at labeling. So it's almost like an AI operations team that we set up. So these 6 elements coming together is what we see as, driving value. And then the last point I'll just say is that, while AI and technology should be, must be explainable, and we need to have the right approaches, the tools, the focus, right? All of which I talked about. But people must also behave responsibility with technology, right? Things will go wrong. That doesn't mean you need to shut down the program. That doesn't mean that AI doesn't work, right? So I think there is an element of, us being very upfront. And, when we go and deploy AI and we try to explain AI, to say, look, this is not a done deal, right? There will be issues. We will explain. Our explanations may not come out well, but the thing we can guarantee is we will ensure that the AI continuously learns, because that's what a human intelligence does. And at some level, that's what we are trying to mimic. So with that, I'll just pause. I don't know, Sudeep, if there are any questions on the chat, then I think we have about 15 minutes, I think. So I'm happy to take those.
Sure. So we have quite a few questions. So Gaurav, I'm sharing one from Yashashwini, and her question is very focused towards the Indian context. All right. So she's asking if explainable AI manifesting in Indian context of Indian languages, people from different parts of the country with different economic classes. And I'm also merging it to her other question, saying that are there challenges unique to India for explainable AI?
I don't think there are any challenges which are unique to AI, right? Unique to India. I think, look, the diversity of India, right? Just in terms of our customer base, demographics, attributes, and just, behaviors. Obviously, we are much more diverse than any other country. But as I said, that is not the driving factor behind explainable AI, right? Uh, I would say that if you think about bias, right, there's probably a little more bias in the way a lot of business decisions are taken within the Indian context in terms of certain products and services being bought or being sold, or typically in the past being adopted by certain segments of customers. So I think explainable AI does become a little more important so the point which is important is point number 2 and 1, right? Which is, what is the goal that you as a business have, right? So if your goal as a business is, look, the Indian market is diverse. I've looked at one segment. I've typically sold to one segment. I want to diversify. Then when you build your AI using historical data, you'll probably not achieve that outcome. Then you need to be very deliberate on saying, look, my AI for what I want to do new or what I want to get into as something different has to be differently crafted, differently designed, right? So I think that's probably the one thing I would say.
Sure, sure. And another follow-up question I just saw that regarding facial recognition. Do we have training data of Indian faces from all parts of the country?
No. So that is, as I said, right, data remains a challenge.
Right.
And data remains a challenge on facial recognition along 2 dimensions, Sudeep, right? One is we need permission from customers, right? And companies and enterprises need permissions from customers to use it. I think the entire process around getting that permission to use is actually very weak in India. It's much weaker than in other countries. And so that's definitely a big risk for facial recognition. And unless we solve for that, so one is just getting the data.
Right.
B, can you actually use that data is actually a big question mark, at least within the Indian context.
Right.
But I would say that facial recognition is something that, at least in our experience, is actually one of the most hotly debated use cases. And I've seen a lot of places where that's actually got shut down.
Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. So very interesting question by Sriram. He put it on the chat asking, does the human in the loop have to be data scientists, or we can have product owner or business analyst to take up this role?
Actually, that's a great question, Sriram. I should have clarified it. Actually, it should not be a data scientist, right? Because the human in the loop is someone who needs to be able to understand actually what is the end goal of the AI output for the business or the operation or the process, right? So actually, that's the right skill set for the human in the loop, right? So so I'll just give you an example, right? We have done a lot of work on using AI to automate, classification of emails, right? So there is a lot of email coming into any service process or service operation, and you want the AI to be able to classify emails so that the right operator or the agent, right, actually accesses it, right? Now, when we do that classification, right, the people who can actually do the human in the loop are people who know more of what is going to be the email about in terms of, what is the service email about, what is the kind of operation about, because they're the people who can really validate and then send it back to the data science team about, look, this is not correctly classified, or this was wrongly classified, and this is probably why, right? So I think that entire human in the loop is much more of a business person, as you correctly said, Sriram.
Perfect. There's another one he's asking. He's rather saying that no amount of documentation would help in explaining decisions taken by the neural network models, right? So should we go with the surrogate models then?
I think, look, you can go with surrogate models, but I would not say that, see, the thing is, right, even if you think about linear regression or any of the typical models, right? If you have 40 variables and you have 40 coefficients, it's still not going to be easy to explain, right? But there is a way that you can actually, in fact, I have put it, I have put a small this thing here. Let me just try to pull it up. Hold on. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, Gaurav.
Yeah. So this is a, from a academic paper, which I found very interesting, right? So look, there's a model, right? And there is this model basically predicts that, based on financial transactions, what kind of a personality type you may have, right? So the point is, you can have a good rule base and say, look, if these are the key predictive parameters, then this is what the model will predict, right? And beyond a point, that's okay for most business owners to look at, right? They just want to understand, look, do we just know why certain predictions happen? We don't really need to explain every variable, coefficient, feature, right? That is actually there. So I think that's something which, to my mind, and I just pause the sharing, right? Or actually, let me just keep it. To my mind, it is something that we can work on, and I think we can work with our business owners or our business partners to solve for it, right? If you think about Microsoft's Interpret ML, that actually has, it looks at sharp line values. It actually gives a very nice dashboard, which I think is very easily understood, or not easily understood, but very clear to the business owner. Look, at the end of the day, think about it. They don't really want to understand, right? They want to ensure that you have a process by which you can explain, or you at least have done the diligence to figure out why certain predictions or extractions happen. And as long as we can show that, I think, there is a good chance that AI will continue getting adopted.
Sure. So any further questions for Gaurav? I would request if you can key in quickly. And Gaurav, while they're doing that, I see another question asking, can XAI be used to parse through technical documents to provide solutions to faults of complex equipment? Where can we find literature of XAI on implementing this kind of use case?
Yeah. No, actually it can, right? And I can share some things after the call. So, there's actually a big piece of work that is getting done. So for example, in nuclear program assessments, right, using explainable AI. So here the goal is, a nuclear program, assessor, right? They actually get reams and reams of data from machines, from inventory, from logs, from interviews, from third party, public literature, right? And they need to actually put it all together to see whether there is anything potentially wrong in the nuclear program, or there is a risk in the way the program is getting run, right? So this actually is like, think of it, it's like, audio, video, text, all of this data coming in. And actually there's a lot of work that has been done to figure out what are the core signals, what are the 3-4 core signals that can actually predict or actually flag off risk, right? And for example, they have insights around, look, actually a particular kind of equipment is what we need to focus on, because the data coming out of that equipment is what is actually going to tell whether there is a risk in the way the program is getting run. And in the inventory, there's one kind of material, and you look at fluctuation of that procurement, and that drives risk, right? So they've got to very specific levels of within a nuclear program. And I just give that as an example because I think that is where a lot of the machine data that you spoke about is getting used. So I can share that, Sudeep, and you can share it further.
Perfect. And another example, or rather a question from Yasashwini. She's asking, for example, if we are having an AI deployed in Karnataka, we need explanations in Kannada, right? And if we have people who cannot read, we need multimodal voice-based explanation delivery.
I think, look, I think we have to just think about who you want to explain to, right? So as I said, different people need different explanations, right? So I'm assuming the explanation you are talking about is the explanation to the end customer, right? So the customer to whom you said. Now, there are ways to translate. So I have not specifically had a use case in Karnataka, but there is probably then a piece of work to be done, that just as I said, right, this is the same as putting label of what are the nutrients or ingredients going into your food, right? In the beginning, it was in English, it was, taxonomy, which was not easy to understand. And now, it's in regional languages, it's simplified. So I think AI explainability will go in the same way, right? So I think today, obviously, a lot of the tools and things that I spoke about have in English, but I think you can be rest assured that regional translations are something that will come very soon. But you're right, that's not something we have readily available, and that's something that in your AI program, I think you should factor in.
Sure, sure. Gaurav, I don't see any further questions, and we are just about time. Is there any last parting remarks you would like to share?
No, I think this has been just great. So I mean, I've obviously tried to give a as Sudeep said, a 30,000 feet view, which tries to cater to many groups. I'll be happy to get the insights, ideas, and suggestions from all of you and your experience so we can connect. I do just want to say that, look, while explainable AI is important, the part before which I talked about, which is the removal of bias, only when you club the AI bias and the AI explainability and actually the AI interpretability, which I've put in here, do you get a truly responsible AI system. And I think that's what we should all aspire to build. Because again, right, AI, responsible AI system, all three are key, right? A system is important. So the system means that you need the human in the loop, you need the monitoring, you need the design, you need the documentation, you need the system excellence to run. And obviously, responsibility means that you need to ensure that the data that goes into it. And one last analogy, right? It's like a child, right? AI is similar to a child, right? What experiences and what you feed the child is how the child will take decisions. So if you feed the child, and feed the child is probably not the right, but if you expose the child to, things which are biased and things which are not necessarily what you want them to make decisions on in the future about, they will not make they will make the decision that was made in the past. And the same with AI. So I think we just need to have that understanding as we go ahead.
That's a wonderful example.
Sudeep, yeah. So with that, Sudeep, I will pause. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always great. And I look forward to continuing to work with NASSCOM on some of the initiatives.
Our pleasure, Gaurav. It is always our pleasure to have you talk to our audience. And thank you everyone for taking out time and, being part of this, I would say, educational and enlightening session. We look forward to have you again. So Mr. Srinivasan is asking, can I have Gaurav's email ID? So I'll pass it on to him.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
For your time.